Well, we've come to the end of another eventful school year, and we have this year's current school board representatives and next year's board representatives from PALY and GUNN with us to talk about a lot of stuff that happened this year, pressing student issues. And so we have David Tayeri, this PALY's rep this year, ADVAIT ARUN, a GUNN's rep for next year, ANKIT RANJAN, GUNN's rep this year, and RICHY ISLAS, PALY's rep for next year. So welcome to all of you. So I wanted to start with something very fresh. This morning, the two of you came to the Board Policy Review Committee to make a proposal that student board reps get a near full vote on the board. And last year you successfully pushed for a preferential vote, so you cast a vote and it's recorded in the board minutes, but it doesn't carry any weight. So can you tell me a little bit about why you're pushing for this limited vote and what that would mean if it's granted to you guys?
Sure. I'll start a bit. So what we're trying to do and what we've been trying to do for, I think, actually the last couple of years is increase responsibility and the respect that the student board member commands in the board. And well, this might not always be possible, I think, in a district like Palo Alto's, where we have an engaged student body and we have qualified board representatives coming up. I think that's really important. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to give students a full vote so that they're recognized as full stakeholders in the community, because while they can vote for normal board members, they can vote for their student board members. Mm-hmm. And so now if somebody's trying to push something through the board, they will have to respect and recognize student voice when they are presenting their ideas. And this just happened in Maryland, right? Yeah, exactly, a couple of weeks ago. Mm-hmm. And the thing is, we actually don't expect that it'll change that many votes. As I said at the meeting, only one vote this year was actually would actually have been affected by the student votes, and that was a procedural vote that was anyway overturned because we looked at our bylaws and we realized that we couldn't have voted that way anyway. So you know, we don't actually expect that this will make much difference in the way the votes are carried out, but it will make a difference in the way that the student representative is seen. And if you want to talk a bit more about the precedent.
Right, so I think a major argument against the whole getting a full or limited student vote is the fact that there's not been legal precedent. And I know in California Ed Code, there's no specific provision for or against a explicit full student vote on the board. But on the state board, California State Board, it exists. And in Maryland, as we just found out, as of a few weeks ago, there are two counties, Anne Arundel and Montgomery counties, which have full or nearly full voting rights for students. And we're building off of that precedent, even though it's not from California, to say that we might as well liberalize the board policies here at home, because ultimately parents and community members, they are the ones who vote in the board members, but the board members are charged with serving students and serving the district. And that's sort of a conflict of interest when students aren't legitimized in that process. And I'm not saying that we don't have the respect we deserve already. I mean, after conversing with Dr. McGee and all the board members, I mean, I trust that they take student opinion really, really seriously. But at this point in time, I feel like as students, we have the ability to actually make our voice legitimate and make our voice heard, because we're the constituents that the board is supposed to serve. And that's sort of the main reason for doing it.
It does seem like, I mean, there is a lot of talk about student voice and giving you guys a seat at the table for important decisions. It seems like this would be something where it's like the rubber will hit the road if this really happens and they give you a vote or not.
Well, I think this is the most potent way, this is one point where board members will actually have to readdress where their power is, right? Until this point, even the preferential vote, that was all simply, it was symbolic, and it didn't actually change the procedure or how decisions were made. And this is, we've been working up to it for a while. Even though it might seem like it's coming out of the blue, I don't feel like it has been. And I think that it's, it's reaching the point where the board will have to really step up and say that we respect what students believe, and we're going to take concerted effort to hear what they have to say.
Yeah, and I think for a board that's kind of been criticized a lot for not putting their money where their mouth is on a lot of issues, I think this is a great opportunity for them to finally kind of silence some of those people who say that by actually backing up what they say is important by making a change like this. And speaking of precedent, not just precedent on a national basis legally for doing something like this, but precedent in pause of giving students independence and power has I think historically turned out very well. You can look at PALY's journalism program, for instance. most publications are almost entirely student-run or entirely student-run, and we win gold crowns from, we win national journalism prizes every year. So I think there's proof that when you like empower students and say that you trust them, good things happen.
Well, that's talking about student voice and decisions where maybe you guys felt like your independence was taken away or sort of encroached on. Are there, I mean, how do you feel like student voice was treated over the course of, for the graduating seniors, your years at GUNN, and also for the rising seniors, just, I mean, at GUNN and PALY, sorry. Just the topic of student voice and how it was taken seriously or at some points not, in your opinion?
A big turning point for me, I feel, was, this is a couple years ago, but zero period.
Yeah.
I think that was that was when I first got involved in district politics and actually became aware of what was happening at the district level. And that's when I first went to a board meeting and everything. And I think that was one case where the district attempted to make a decision. I mean, they ended up making a decision that students didn't necessarily disagree with, but they definitely did not feel involved in the decision. And so, you know, we walked in and we sat in on the meeting, and you know, there were quite a few students there who spoke about it, right? And I think that was a case where the board realized that if they don't consider students' opinions, then, or if they don't listen to students and they don't involve them in the discussion, then it'll make things difficult because they are the final body to whom they are responsible. And so ever since then, I've seen a gradual increase in both the respect for student voice, not just by the board, but by the community, and also the involvement of students in the decision-making process. One other thing I wanted to point out about precedent is that we have this amazing opportunity here to be a forward-thinking district. If we do this, then one thing that ADVAIT and I were talking about is the way it worked in Maryland is that school districts made a change, and then they contacted the representatives and got a bill passed in the state to make it easy for other schools to do this. We could get something by, if this happened in Palo Alto, we could get something by on the California Board of Education and actually make a difference in how school boards across the state work.
Much broader impact.
Yeah, and this is a kind of thing that, you know, we as a district have the opportunity to do. And, you know, we talk so much about being at the forefront of change. So I think it's important that, you know, we take the opportunities we can to innovate and make a difference.
Before the show started, we were talking about issues that you wanted to bring up, and you talked about the issue of getting different people to board meetings. I think there are certainly parents who are regulars, and I think students who over the course of the last few years and certain issues have become more comfortable showing up and speaking. Can you talk a little bit about that and sort of what you would like to see change at board meetings in terms of participation?
Tell you the truth, I would want to see just different kinds of parents coming, Mexicans, South Americans. Yeah. Just how would I put this? East Palo Alto parents don't really come. I don't even think we have I don't even think they can see the board meetings in East Palo Alto, and that's one of the things I was also thinking about. I want them to be able to turn on their TV and see what's going on in their kids' school district, and I believe that is the first step that we should take, and opening opportunity for them to come and talk. And once the students see that their parents are getting involved, they will get involved. And
is there anything that you want to do as a student board representative to sort of encourage that?
Well, I want to have more meetings in the Tinsley program, people that are in the Tinsley program, so they get more connected. I feel like I am in the Tinsley program. I've been in the Tinsley program since kindergarten. My mom, to tell you the truth, has never went to a board meeting. I don't even think she's ever been to a meeting in East Palo Alto, if there is any that I don't know of. So
yeah, and I think the intersection between like these two problems, I think there's a lot of intersection, because I think in both cases, whether it's students or parents in the Tinsley program, their voices, I don't think the problem so much has been the board seeing the voices as legitimate, because I think they do, and I think they would like to act on what the student underrepresented groups are feeling. I think the issue historically has been getting the voice to the board, and I think that in terms of the student voice, the vote would be an excellent step to not only having a more direct voice from students to board, but also energizing students to know that their voice matters and thereby get it to the board more. Because at PALY, at least, I can't think of many examples where students felt that their voice was disrespected, but I can think of many examples where students felt like there's no point in going and speaking their mind because they didn't think it would have an impact.
Right. And we say student voice, but like if you look at like a lot of the surveys that schools do for their own students, and generally like what we try to do to get students involved, if students even are involved in the first place, it's normally the same kinds of students, the same background of students who are always, you know, putting their voices in. And you know, while that's still a legitimate voice, it's not really full student voice. Like we're here to represent all students, and when a bunch of students like Tinsley program kids or underrepresented minorities, blacks, Hispanics, when they aren't able to put their own voices in, it's not really student voice. And I feel like by getting a student vote, you know, like you said, having a near limited student vote, or near full student vote, it would like, you know, really energize students to actually speak their minds, know that their voice really does matter. And then that also gives us a responsibility as the student representatives to, you know, get those voices actually heard. Like we have to actively make that happen if we want student voice to be a legitimate, you know, reason for our being here. Yeah.
I'm curious, how do you, the current reps, how do you go about when there's a big issue coming before the board? How do you go about seeking input and trying to make sure that you are, because you're up there, you're trying to represent many voices. What's sort of your process for doing that and making sure you can feel comfortable speaking on behalf of students up there?
It's not always easy because you can't really force kids to come to you and talk to you. Sure, you can like message every student individually and say, hey, what's your opinion on this? But at the end of the day, they kind of had to take the initiative to talk to you. I think our biggest job is informing students, and once you inform them, you kind of have to hope that then they will be able to feel strongly about something and reach out to you. That's been my experience, and it's been hard, like no doubt. It's no matter how much you inform, there are some kids who are still, even if they feel strongly about something, not going to reach out to you about it just because they feel like it doesn't matter. So I think that's the biggest problem that student board representatives have to overcome in order to like truly feel comfortable representing all students. I don't know if that's like same for you, ANKIT.
I had a similar experience. My first responsibility, I felt, was to make sure that students knew about the issues which might impact them. Now, my ways about doing that, my general system was if there was something that I felt was directly impacting high school students, then I would make sure that SEC was informed, and I would also make sure that posts were made in the class Facebook groups and stuff like that. However, another issue was getting responses from those students and making sure that I had a variety of voices backing behind my own. And, you know, I worked with SEC a little bit on this, on trying to brainstorm ways that we can collect student voices, and actually ADVAIT will be working on one project which I think is really creative and cool for trying to get student voices next year. But what I generally found was I would either some issues I'd hear a lot from students, for example, about the weighted GPA. I got a lot of students which messaged me. But for some things like sex ed, that was something where I felt like students would have a strong voice on, a strong opinion on, but they weren't going to be proactive about it. So I went out and made sure that I talked with students up and down the spectrum, and I talked with a couple of living skills teachers too. I wanted to get a variety of opinions, and so, you know, of course there'll be some issues with bias and how the data is collected, but I feel like some voices are better than no voices at all. And, you know, I think it's a constant push that we're trying to make to decrease the distance between the board and the entire student body. And it's difficult because the real issue that I faced is people don't necessarily care, and they don't necessarily feel that what they can do can make an impact. And, you know, at some points, you have to realize that people have a lot of important things going on in their lives. And when you're representing them, you have to also realize that, you know, you need to help them find a balance between where they should be involved and where it might be a waste of their time to be involved. And, you know, getting people to care the right amount is very difficult because, you know, I care a lot about district politics, but I also realize that, you know, district politics are a kind of niche thing for people to care about. And getting every student to be concerned and give their input to it, it's kind of difficult. And so, you know, one thing that we're trying to work on is making sure that we can at least give opportunities for students who do care to have an input and have accurate metrics of students who don't care. I think you might want to talk about a bit about your flex time idea.
Right. So at GUNN, there's this thing. Every Tuesday we have a thing called Flex Time. Tuesday morning, it's a mandatory study hall. All students on campus have to go to a classroom, check in with their student ID, and they can work there for 50 minutes. Next year, with the schedule change, we have 2 flex times in a week on Tuesday and Thursday. Same idea, a mandatory study hall. And in the past, there's been, like I mentioned, a lot of volunteer bias in surveys, a lot of the same people always speaking up. And while it's good to, but some voices are better than no voices, of course, we're here to represent all students. And I feel like, we could reduce volunteer bias, reduce like the inherent bias in the system that we have where the same people keep speaking up by sort of piggybacking off of flex time. With flex time, my idea was, and I've talked to teachers, I've talked to the stats teacher at GUNN, I've talked to some of the programmers who run a lot of the systems at GUNN, and my idea was every week we take a random sample of 200 students based on student ID, and when they check in the flex time, they're flagged and they're marked as, hey, will you answer this one simple question? And it's a question that SEC or the administration designs, a very simple question, like a yes, no, don't know, don't care, or rate this on 1 through 5 or don't care type of question that students can easily answer that gives SEC and the administration and myself, when I'm taking it to the board, an accurate, a mostly accurate, statistically representative sample of what people think about certain issues, whether they don't care about the homecoming event or whether they thought this policy done by the board was a good idea, stuff like that. Yeah. And I feel like it has a lot of potential to just give a constant stream of data to every stakeholder in the situation. Because if we always know what students are thinking, it informs us better and allows us to make more educated decisions on a lot of issues. I feel if we ask the right questions, that's the big
that strikes me as going to where the students are, and I think that's been talked a lot about also with East Palo Alto parents or Spanish-speaking parents, that more meetings should be held in East Palo Alto in Spanish, or things that are more accessible instead of expecting that they're going to come out on at 6:30 on a weeknight to a meeting, or that students are going to be able to do the same if even if they care about an issue.
Can I just talk about that also really quickly? I just think that the tricky thing about us being able to faithfully serve the best interest of the most students is that even for the regular board members, they face re-election, and so they have to. They have to keep the majority of people happy. We don't really face any consequences for doing whatever we want with our vote, which is, I think, why there should actually be some kind of regulation on a district level to ensure that we're, because I think we do it on our own anyways, our best to know what every student is thinking. But if there was maybe some kind of regulated way that we could get student input, and I think that idea is excellent for sure. I think Richie should consider implementing that next year at PALY or something similar. But it's just we don't have a great mechanism for knowing that we're doing what most people want. So something like that has to be developed, I think, in order for us to faithfully use our limited vote if we were to get that.
So let's pivot a little bit to some current events. I wanted to talk about something that's really been on the top of everyone's minds in the community, sexual assault reports at PALY. And recently, I don't know if you caught earlier this week, the district put out a new log saying that they had received, I think it was 17 new reports of sexual assault or sexual harassment, mostly at PALY just this month. Wow. Sort of in the wake of all of this, the media attention and just this being more out there. Administrators also said that they thought it was because students are feeling more comfortable and safe reporting these issues. Do you agree with that? Do you think that this spike in reports is coming from something else?
You want to go first, Richie?
I do believe that everybody that's coming out is feeling more comfortable. It's everybody's talking. It's a way better vibe at school. You're everybody's together, you're united, and then they're basically just they're talking to each other and they're helping each other out. And I think that's what's so great about PALY is that we're very tight community. And
to piggyback off of that, if you see the bracelet that Richie's wearing, so actually only a couple of days after the KTVU story broke, some students organized a mass handout of those bracelets that say "I stand with victims of sexual assault." Pretty sure at least 90% of students got one and wore one. Many still wear them, and I think that exactly what Richie was talking about a like almost entirely unanimous feeling of like sexual assault is not okay, and we support the victims and we support them in their reporting of the incidents. So I think that's very good, and that has definitely spurred the recent reports. I think what's not so good is like obviously people are feeling very strong emotions about this, and I think it's causing a lot of people to act in or have thoughts that are not entirely helpful to anyone involved in the situation, and kind of like reactionary talk that's
what do you mean?
Oh, just I think like people can get carried away when something like awful like this happens, and we tend to think of things in black and white very quickly, and I think it ends up doing more harm than good. It's not easy to say like, oh, we need to have like a very nuanced, balanced discussion about sexual assault after we find out something shocking like this. But when everyone is kind of like, there's just like a wave of like anger and backlash, sometimes it can be counterproductive. But I think, and actually in this case, the motion definitely had like a net benefit because it led to all these other reports.
So but do you think things like, calling for Kim Diorio to resign or Max McGee to resign, those are sort of negative reactionary?
Yeah, things like that. Things like people beginning to have personal vendettas or kind of like angry outbreaks towards people who, towards other people who they think may like have committed sexual assaults, and kind of like a dismaying of innocent until proven guilty overall, which is like such a tricky balance in terms of a sexual assault, because you don't want to discount what victims are saying, but you also don't want people to be wrongly accused, and especially since in a time when the emotions are so high, an accusation can mean so much. So it's so tricky because like the emotions are so intense like when something like this happens.
What kind of action or response are you looking for from the PALY administration and the school board in terms of making sure that from now on forward, when people do report sexual assault, sexual harassment, primarily that it's handled promptly and correctly?
Well, we already at the last meeting they discussed in their new sexual assault guidelines the introduction of an anonymous reporting for sexual assault incidences, and I think that did they pass that?
They haven't yet.
No, they're going to talk about it further. So they already have something similar for bullying, and they have something similar for students that they're concerned about, like mental health for.
Right.
And I think something like that could be helpful. I mean, in terms of policy change, I don't really know how much can be done exactly to ensure that the district is going to be dealing with these things promptly and in a fair way.
I mean, those policies are already in place, so it's a matter of following them.
Yeah, I think, because like at the end of the day, all policy regarding this is going to say essentially the same thing, is that we need to do all we can to stop sexual assault and find out and encourage people to report and find out if the reports are true in a timely fashion. I think it's a matter of the administrators following through and actually like faithfully following those guidelines in general.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I just want to say one quick thing. I do believe that our administrators are doing all they can, and you can only do so much. The students that have been sexually assaulted are the ones that have to go the other half. You can only reach out your hand and wait for the other person to let them shake their hand. So I do believe that the district is they're putting out all these what are they called?
Support systems.
Yeah, support systems. Policies. And it's really up to the students for them to follow through on that. They can't go out and ask, oh, have you been sexually assaulted?
Right, of course. But I think it's when that person, a student does show up to an administrator's door and say, this happened to me. And it doesn't mean that they assume immediately that happened and another student is guilty. And but just to take that report seriously and to immediately look into it I mean, the issue is also putting supports in place for the students. Like you said, even if it hasn't been proven yet for something to have happened, if a student is feeling affected at school, they need to be properly supported.
Yeah.
Another big breaking news in recent weeks was that the principal of GUNN is leaving at the end of the school year. Could you guys talk a little bit about what kind of a principal Denise Herman has been in your eyes, and what you're also looking for in a new principal?
I suppose I'll start. I feel like I've had a lot of interaction with her over this past year, especially regarding the schedule change and all that. And honestly, I feel like she got way more bad press than she deserved. I mean, I'll be the first to say that, considering, I feel like I inadvertently helped facilitate that bad press, especially in the whole schedule conflict, which I'll get into in a bit. But I feel like, especially after the tragedies that happened in my freshman year, and with the whole cluster and everything, I feel like, she had a mandate to make GUNN better, and I feel like she did have that vision, and she had like, the vision to see that, we need a better mental health system, we need a better emotional, like, SEL type system for students. And now social emotional learning is going to be implemented next year. We have a schedule change that, for better or for worse, is going to help accomplish that. And I mean, ultimately, her vision is what, it was a positive vision, and I feel like she had a lot of bad press for, saying the right things, I feel like. And ultimately, I did have my disagreements with her. I do feel that the schedule change that she made, especially this year, was not in the best interest of the students. I feel like the process was not the best. But I mean, ultimately, I think in terms of like her vision and goals, it was extremely positive. Of course, I mean, especially this year, I feel like in my interactions with her, because they've not always been positive, only because I felt like she wasn't treating students with the requisite amount of respect. She wasn't being transparent or communicative enough. And especially with the whole idea of SEL and the fact that there was going to be a third schedule change in 3 years, a lot of it, like, it just felt too much for students. I feel like students didn't know what the administration was doing. There was a lot of bad blood between those two groups, and it's not all deserved. But in the end, I feel like there was, like, her first schedule change back in my freshman year when we transitioned from a rotating to block schedule. I feel like that might have been one of her most positive legacies, decreasing homework load, making test stacking a bit easier to handle, especially like making the lives of students easier. I feel like it's been really positive. But since then, I feel like she's pushed that too far, and I feel like students have sort of turned that the opposite way. I don't know. For better or for worse, these changes are going to happen. And ultimately, in the next principal that we have, a principal who's a lot more transparent, a lot more communicative, and a lot more willing to interact with staff and students on a more respectful level and on a more equal footing. I feel like that would be really well received, especially after a lot of the extremely intense change that we've had at GUNN over the past few years. Yeah.
I think she had a really hard job. She, coming in and having to deal with a crisis so quickly after, while she's still trying to figure out how to work with the community that she's come into, was extremely difficult. And, as a result, she had to deal with a lot of forces pushing on her. The thing that I feel she did was, I felt like she moved too fast with some things. And that created tension between her and the students. More than the students, I feel like created tension between her and the faculty. Yeah. To a point where faculty, I think, members of faculty were being unprofessional and were talking with their students about how they felt, which, of course, I feel, that speaks a bit about maybe the faculty shouldn't be doing that, but it also speaks about the level of negativity between the faculty and the administration. And I also know personally, like, from my position in more confidential conversations with some faculty members, that they simply felt that they were being hindered in doing good work because of the amount of change that was happening. Things like the professional learning communities and stuff like that, they felt were hindering their work rather than actually allowing them to, improve. And I think that's kind of a reality of any hastily implemented plan.
Right.
My biggest concern, and I understand why the decision was made for her leaving, but my biggest concern is that there are 3 major changes going in next year. And
which are?
Well, the SEL curriculum, the teacher advisory,
learning.
The teacher advisory system, and the schedule change.
Yeah.
And especially with the advisory system and the SEL training, the SEL curriculum and the SEL teaching, that I remember when the board saw the SEL proposal, it was a 5-year implementation plan, and she's leaving before the first year. Yeah. And she was the go-to person for all of the stuff.
She was the inertia behind it.
Yeah, exactly. And so now we're going to have to bring someone in who's going to have to come up to speed on 3 major changes that are happening on the school level. And having somebody who can do that effectively, is going to be difficult. And it's what's especially worrisome is that it might make it even more it might make it difficult for the students and for the faculty to build a good relationship with that principal, because that principal will still have to push through these changes which are making teachers, making the jobs of teachers more difficult, because for the third time in a row they're going to have to rechange their curricula.
Yeah, the way of doing things.
The way that they teach classes. And so my fear is that because she's leaving after making such big change, I've heard a lot of people who said things more cynically that, oh man, she comes in, builds a resume, and then leaves. She starts all these programs. And it is fair that people get rewarded for starting things, not finishing them. But that said, I don't think that was entirely her purpose.
Right.
It's just my fear that the next couple of years will be difficult if we have a principal who has to manage all this change without having been there for those committee meetings and having been there to make those decisions.
And I think on our part, like, the goodwill of students is necessary to make sure this all goes through. I mean, the fact that she was the inertia behind, like, SEL, and the fact that she's gone, I think students are going to have to step up and say, you know what, we're done thinking about the past, we need to, like, I know a lot of students are still responding negatively to the idea of SEL, and I feel like, if it's a failure, then that's not good for anyone, really. It's a failed program. It's not good for students, not good for staff, not good for the administration. And if it's a success, I feel like it'll take some time to adjust to, and of course the new administration will have to handle that while still maintaining good staff and student relations. But if it's a success, I think the students do need to play a part in that and recognize, you know what, this change is happening. For better or for worse, we need to be a part of it, and we need to accept the fact that it's here and work our best to make sure it doesn't crash and burn, I suppose. Yeah.
Before we wrap up, I was wondering if the two graduated seniors, if you could think of what was the most impactful change that was made during your time at PALY and GUNN, and talk about it a little bit.
You can go first.
Give me a little. That's a big, tall order. The most impactful change.
During all 4 years.
Yeah. It could be personally impactful or school-wide or something that was just important to you.
This is a little informal, but I definitely feel that kind of bringing it back to what I was saying about students being more respected, I feel that the district has changed in the way that it sees students and the way that it sees student input. I've heard that from some board members, and I feel like that's one of the most important things that I've seen, at least, is that students feel a lot more in control and a lot more self-reliance in their decisions. And, I guess this is really abstract, but I think it manifests in multiple ways. People, if they want to make a change, like with the, if they want to make a change, they'll start a club to make that change. You see like the bracelets being handed out at PALY, and then, that's a sign of students stepping up and making a change where they think they can make a change.
Yeah.
You saw Maya coming to the board meeting when she had an issue with the way that her GPA was being calculated and making a change there. I feel like that's happening more now than ever before. And I am really excited to see where that takes us, because it's a student community with such vibrancy that I think will just, I'm really excited to see what will happen when students feel like they have that ability of self-determination.
Yeah.
Not to give you like a non-answer, but I think what's been impactful for me is realizing that change is going to be really slow, because ultimately a lot of what happens is based on culture and how students feel about the school going in, and that isn't likely to change much immediately, because a lot of what students know about PALY or GUNN or their high school going in is from their older siblings and from their friends who are older, and then they have a set of expectations going in, and then they kind of live those expectations. So any like meaningful change that's going to happen over time, policies are going to help, but ultimately it's going to come from culture changing at the schools. And I mean, I wish I had an answer for like how do we do that. I'm not really sure, but that's how change is going to be implemented. At the end of the day, it's going to be student behavior changing, student opinion changing, and student expectations changing. So I guess that's what's been impactful for me.
It seems like your role, all of your roles as the student board representative, plays a big part in that, and whether or not it's slow or fast, but just like you said, keeping students informed and being that conduit between, you know, where things are really happening at the district office and the campuses is really important.
Can I just add one more thing though?
Yeah.
I think, sorry, I can't answer your question in a way. I think one impactful way that I've seen change at PALY was actually the appointing of Richie this year as board representative, because we had a bunch of very qualified other candidates as well, in addition to Richie. It's actually appointed position at PALY, not elected. And so I sat with kind of a small council of like 4 other ASB members and our advisor, Matt Hall. And we had like a 5 to 10 minute interview with each candidate. And of course we knew about them coming in. And after that we had a discussion about who would be the best. And honestly, there's like, out of those 5 people, there were 2 guys that were basically like me, or like ANKIT. And they were kind of guys who were going to be traditional, like there is more of the same. And then there's 2 other guys who are kind of like me, but even better in some ways. And so, these, out of those 4 guys, I think any of them would be very strong choices for board representative. They're excellent public speakers. They speak their mind. They're great with adults, and they're relatable for students. All qualities that Richie has as well. And then I think we were talking, and I initially had voted. My initial vote was actually with someone who was not Richie. And we actually, out of like the 5 people that were there and the 5 people candidates, our first vote, everyone voted for a different person. And we discussed it again. And then we kind of talked about how we actually had the opportunity to make a change here and impact something, because there are traditionally not a lot of Tinsley kids on ASB. Especially, I don't think the board representative has ever seen a Tinsley kid fill that position.
You might be the first.
And so we talked like we could put it off another year to make this kind of change, or we could make it this year. And so we chose Richie. I mean, not just for that reason, obviously. Richie is extremely qualified besides that. But I think that's one impactful way we changed this year.
Yeah, I think that's a really important change, and I'm excited to see what you do. And
thank you. Me too.
Both of you. Well, thank you so much for coming in. We could talk for much longer, but I really appreciate it. Good luck to the recent alums on what comes next, and I'll be looking forward to working with you 2 next year.
I look forward to it. Thanks so much.
So that's all for today on Behind the Headlines. If you liked what you saw, you can click subscribe below. You can follow us on social media. We're at Palo Alto Weekly on Twitter, or join the conversation online at Town Square. See you next week.